in the glittering ballroom of Dupont Hall, a grand 1930s estate, a waltz turns deadly when Lady Eleanor Dupont is struck down by a dagger in a fleeting blackout. Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, steps into a web of secrets, blackmail, forbidden love, and hidden obsessions. A threatening letter, a stolen key, and a trace of poison unravel a cast of suspects: a desperate brother-in-law, a defiant niece, a cold-hearted fiancé, a resentful cousin, a nervous doctor, and a silent secretary. As clues converge, Poirot's relentless logic exposes a killer driven by twisted love, revealing that even the most elegant dance can end in murder. Will you follow the steps to uncover the truth? Chapter 1: The Invitation. The autumn of 1935 draped London in a golden shroud, where the crisp air carried whispers of fallen leaves and the faint tang of coal smoke from countless chimneys. In his impeccably ordered flat at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed armchair, his small, precise hands cradling a steaming cup of tisane. The morning light filtered through heavy velvet curtains, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany table before him, where a neat stack of correspondence awaited his attention. Each letter had been opened with a silver letter knife, its edges aligned with geometric precision, a testament to Poirot's unyielding need for order. His moustache, meticulously waxed, quivered slightly as he sipped his herbal infusion, savoring the delicate balance of chamomile and mint. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and occasional confidant, lounged with less formality, his lanky frame sprawled across a leather armchair. The Times lay open on his lap, though his eyes wandered more to the flickering fire in the grate than to the printed words. Hastings, ever the Englishman, preferred the robust aroma of coffee to Poirot's continental tastes, but he had long since ceased to argue the merits of tisane. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of a mantel clock and the occasional crackle of the fire, a harmony that suited Poirot's preference for clarity of thought. On this particular morning, Poirot's attention was drawn to an envelope that stood apart from the rest. It was of heavy cream vellum, embossed with a golden crest depicting a swan entwined with ivy, a symbol of elegance and lineage. The address, written in a flowing feminine hand, bore his name, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The sender was Lady Eleanor Dupont, a widow whose name was synonymous with wealth, grace, and a certain enigmatic allure in London's high society. Poirot's dark eyes, sharp as a hawk's, narrowed as he slit the envelope with care, extracting a single sheet of paper that carried the faint scent of lavender. The letter was an invitation, penned with the precision of one accustomed to command. Lady Dupont requested Poirot's presence at a grand ball to be held in 3 days' time at Dupont Hall, her country estate in the rolling hills of Kent. The event, she wrote, was to honor the legacy of her late husband, Lord Charles Dupont, a financier whose ventures had left an indelible mark on British commerce. Yet it was the final paragraph that caused Poirot's moustache to twitch with interest, a subtle sign of the stirring of his little grey cells. Monsieur Poirot, the letter read, "Your reputation for discretion and insight precedes you. I should be most grateful if you would grace my modest gathering with your presence. I fear there may be matters afoot that require your unique talents. I trust you will understand the delicacy of this request and favor me with your attendance." Poirot folded the letter with care, placing it back in its envelope as though it were a piece of evidence in a case already begun. He leaned back, his fingers steepled, and gazed at the ceiling, where the plasterwork formed intricate patterns that seemed to mirror the complexity of his thoughts. Mon ami Hastings, he said at last, his voice carrying the precise cadence of his Belgian heritage. It appears we are summoned to a dance that may conceal more than mere revelry. Hastings lowered his newspaper, his broad face alight with curiosity. A case, Poirot, at a ball. His tone betrayed a mix of excitement and skepticism, for he knew well that Poirot's invitations often led to mysteries as intricate as the man himself. Perhaps, Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a puzzle. Lady Dupont does not invite Hercule Poirot for his skill at the waltz. There is something behind this gracious request. A ball, oui, but also a shadow. Hastings chuckled, folding the Times. With a rustle. You make it sound positively sinister, old chap. Perhaps she simply wants to show off her famous hospitality. Dupont Hall's quite the place. No gardens, chandeliers, the lot. I read about it in Country Life. Poirot's expression remained unchanged, save for a slight arch of one eyebrow. Mon cher, hospitality does not require the mention of matters and discretion. No, there is a discord in this symphony, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover it. The decision was made. Poirot sent a reply by the midday post, accepting Lady Dupont's invitation with his customary flourish. Hastings, ever eager for adventure, began to speculate on the delights of a country weekend. But Poirot's mind was elsewhere, already dissecting the implications of the letter. Who was Lady Dupont, beyond her public persona? And what matters could trouble a woman of her stature? The journey to Kent was a study in contrasts. The hustle of Charing Cross Station giving way to the serene greens of the countryside, where hedgerows framed fields dappled with the last of the season's wildflowers. Poirot, dressed in a tailored overcoat and a Homburg hat, sat opposite Hastings in their first-class compartment, his gloved hands resting on a silver-topped cane. He gazed out at the passing landscape, but his thoughts were inward, turning over the sparse details he knew of Lady Dupont. Eleanor Dupont had been a beauty in her youth, a debutante who captivated London society before her marriage to Lord Charles, a man 20 years her senior. His death, 5 years prior, in a boating accident off the coast of Cornwall, had left her a widow of considerable means. Dupont Hall, inherited from her husband, was a monument to their shared ambition, its halls adorned with art and its coffers filled with the profits of his financial empire. Yet whispers persisted, rumors of strained family ties, of debts unpaid, of secrets buried beneath the polished veneer of her social standing. Tell me, Hastings, Poirot said, breaking the silence. What do you know of Lady Dupont's circle? The Times is not always forthcoming with the subtleties. Hastings rubbed his chin, his memory jogged by Poirot's question. Well, she's got a brother-in-law, Sir Reginald Dupont, Charles's younger brother. Bit of a rogue, if the gossip's true, likes the horses, and the card tables a bit too much. There's a niece, too, Clara Dupont, engaged to some banker fellow, and a cousin, I think, though I don't recall her name. Oh, and the house staff, of course Grayson, the butler, runs a tight ship. Poirot nodded, filing each name in the orderly compartments of his mind. And the late Lord Dupont, his legacy, as Lady Dupont calls it, what of that? Hastings frowned, searching his memory. Charles Dupont was a titan, or so they say. Built his fortune in shipping and investments. Some said he played fast and loose with the law, but nothing was ever proven. His death was a shock, left Eleanor to manage everything. She's done well, from what I hear, though there's talk of family squabbles over 26, the dagger in Lady Dupont's heart, and a poison that left no trace. The killer had planned with meticulous care, exploiting the chaos of the darkened ballroom to strike and vanish. Yet Poirot knew the truth lay not in grand gestures, but in the small, overlooked details, the smudge of paint, the cigarette stub, the hidden ledger. These were the threads he would weave into a tapestry of justice. As the investigation deepened, Poirot's interviews with the guests revealed a web of motives. Sir Reginald's blackmail, born of desperation, had pushed Lady Dupont to the brink, but he lacked the precision for murder. Clara's secret romance with Julian Marsh, and her brief absence during the dance, cast suspicion on her fiancé's Victor. Langston, whose alibi was shaky. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow's resentment over the Dupont fortune simmered with venom, yet her actions lacked the subtlety of the crime. Miss Lydia Crane, the quiet secretary, seemed composed, her alibi tied to Dr. Felix Marwood, whose nervous tics betrayed a deeper turmoil. The threatening letter, typed on a Remington in the study, pointed to Julian Marsh through a smudge of red paint, but Poirot suspected a misdirection. The dagger, an heirloom from a locked case, implied access to Lady Dupont's inner circle. The cigarette on the terrace, a brand favoured by Marwood, hinted at his presence outside the ballroom. Each clue was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot's mind worked tirelessly to assemble them. In the drawing room, he confronted the guests, his voice calm but commanding. The murder of Lady Dupont was no act of passion, he declared. It was a performance, staged with care. The letter, the dagger, the darkness, all were props in a deadly play. He revealed the ledger, exposing Sir Reginald's blackmail, which Marwood feared would unravel his own secrets. Clara's confession of her terrace rendezvous weakened Langston's alibi, but it was Marwood's medical journal, marked with notes on a rare poison, that sealed the truth. The dagger was his weapon, but a subtle poison had ensured Lady Dupont's vulnerability. Marwood, cornered, confessed. He had tampered with the lights, struck with the dagger, and crafted the letter to frame Sir Reginald, hoping to bury his unrequited obsession and protect his reputation. Inspector Japp led him away as the guests stood in stunned silence, as Poirot and Hastings prepared to leave Dupont Hall. The estate's grandeur seemed diminished, its elegance tainted by betrayal. Hastings, ever sentimental, mourned the loss of the ball's splendor, but Poirot, adjusting his hat, was unmoved. The heart, mon ami, dances to its own rhythm, sometimes to ruin. But order is restored, and that is enough. The train carried them back to London, leaving behind a house of secrets, unveiled by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2. Arrival at Dupont Hall. The train from Charing Cross to Kent wove through a tapestry of autumnal hues, where fields of gold and amber stretched beneath a sky heavy with the promise of rain. Hercule Poirot, seated in the plush confines of a first-class carriage, adjusted his Homburg hat and gazed out at the passing countryside, his sharp eyes noting the orderly hedgerows with approval. Opposite him, Captain Hastings, ever the enthusiast for a country jaunt, chatted amiably about the prospects of a weekend at Dupont Hall, though his words barely penetrated Poirot's preoccupied mind. The Belgian detective's thoughts were fixed on Lady Eleanor Dupont's cryptic invitation, its hint of unease lingering like a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. The journey ended at a quaint station nestled in the Kentish hills, where a sleek Rolls-Royce, sent by Lady Dupont, awaited them. The chauffeur, a young man with a deferential nod, drove them along winding lanes flanked by ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy that dappled the road with shadow and light. Poirot, ever observant, noted the driver's reticence, a quality that suggested either loyalty or caution, perhaps both. Hastings, meanwhile, marveled at the landscape, his enthusiasm undimmed by the faint drizzle that began to speckle the windscreen. Dupont Hall emerged into view as they crested a hill, its Georgian facade a study in symmetry and grandeur. The estate stood like a sentinel amid sprawling gardens, where manicured lawns gave way to rose beds and a fountain that shimmered in the fading light. The house itself, built of honey-colored stone, gleamed with the polish of wealth, its tall windows reflecting the last rays of the afternoon sun. Yet Poirot's keen eye caught a subtle discord. A curtain twitched in an upper window, and the gravel drive bore the marks of hurried footsteps, as though someone had departed or arrived in haste. The car drew to a halt before the imposing oak doors, and Mr. Grayson, the butler, greeted them with a bow that was both precise and practiced. A man in his late 50s, Grayson's silver hair and rigid posture bespoke a lifetime of service. Yet his pale blue eyes held a flicker of wariness that Poirot noted at once. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he intoned, his voice smooth as polished marble, "Lady Dupont awaits you in the drawing-room. If you will follow me." They stepped into a hall of breathtaking elegance, where a chandelier of cut crystal cast prisms of light across marble floors. Portraits of stern-faced Dupont ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the newcomers with silent judgment. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister gleaming with fresh polish, and the air carried the faint scent of beeswax and lavender. Hastings let out a low whistle, earning a reproving glance from Poirot, who preferred to absorb such surroundings in silence, cataloguing every detail for future reference. Lady Dupont awaited them in the drawing-room, a spacious chamber adorned with damask curtains and a roaring fire that cast a warm glow over mahogany furniture. She rose from a velvet settee, a vision of poised elegance, despite the faint lines of strain around her green eyes. Her silver-streaked hair was swept into an impeccable chignon, and her gown, a deep emerald silk, spoke of understated wealth. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a gloved hand, "and Captain Hastings, you are most kind to come on such short notice. I trust your journey was pleasant." "Most agreeable, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly as he took her hand, his eyes never leaving her face. "The beauty of your estate is matched only by the graciousness of your invitation." Hastings, less formal, grinned, "Jolly. Fine place you've got here, Lady Dupont. Quite the setting for a ball." She smiled, but the expression did not reach her eyes. "You are too kind, Captain. Dupont Hall has been in my late husband's family for generations. This ball is to honor his memory." Yet, her voice faltered, and she glanced toward the window where the drizzle had thickened into a steady rain. Poirot seized the moment. "Madame, your letter spoke of matters requiring discretion. Perhaps you might enlighten Hercule Poirot as to the nature of these concerns." Lady Dupont hesitated, her fingers tightening briefly on the arm of the settee. She gestured for them to sit, and as they did, Grayson reappeared with a silver tray bearing tea and delicate porcelain cups. The butler's movements were meticulous, yet Poirot noted a slight tremor in his hand as he poured a detail that did not escape the detective's scrutiny. When Grayson withdrew, Lady Dupont leaned forward, her voice low. "Monsieur Poirot, I am not one to indulge in fancies, but I have received a letter that troubles me deeply." She reached into a lacquered box on the table and produced a folded sheet of paper, its edges slightly worn. "It arrived 3 days ago, delivered anonymously to the house. Poirot took the letter, his gloved fingers handling it with the care of an archaeologist uncovering a fragile relic. The message was typed, its words stark and chilling. Your last dance approaches. Lady Dupont. Debts must be paid. The paper was plain, lacking any distinguishing mark save for a faint smudge of ink at one corner, and the typewriter's impression suggested a modern machine. Perhaps a Remington. Tiens Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. This is no idle jest, madame. Have you enemies who might pen such a threat? Lady Dupont's lips tightened. Enemies? I should hope not. But my husband's business dealings were complex. There are those who resented his success, and since his passing, certain family members have grown, demanding. Sir Reginald, my brother-in-law, has debts he believes I should settle. My cousin, Beatrice Harrow, feels entitled to a share of the estate. Even my niece, Clara, is caught in tensions over her engagement to Mr. Langston, a man of ambition but little warmth. Poirot nodded, his mind already cataloguing names and motives. And this ball, madame, it brings these individuals together. Yes, she admitted. The guest list includes family, close associates, and a few others, a mix that I now fear may spark complications. I had hoped the occasion would unite us, but this letter suggests otherwise. Hastings, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. Sounds like a dashed, unpleasant situation, Lady Dupont. But with Poirot here, you've got the best man for the job. He'll sort it out, won't you, old chap? Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of mild irritation at Hastings' informality. Mon ami, it is not a matter of sorting, but of understanding. The human heart, it reveals itself in the smallest details. Madame, may I retain this letter? For further study? Of course, she replied, her relief palpable. I trust your judgment, Monsieur Poirot. As they spoke, the door opened, and a young woman entered. Her presence like a breath of spring amidst the room's sombre elegance. She was Clara Dupont, Lady Dupont's niece, a vision of youth with auburn curls and eyes that sparkled with intelligence, though shadowed by a hint of defiance. Aunt Eleanor, she said, her voice bright but tinged with urgency. Mr. Grayson says the musicians have arrived early. Shall I see to them? Lady Dupont nodded. Yes, Clara, please do. And meet our guests, Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings. Clara's gaze flicked to Poirot, her curiosity evident. The detective aunt, is something wrong? Nothing to concern you, my dear, Lady Dupont said quickly, though her eyes betrayed her words. Clara curtsied and withdrew, but not before Poirot noted the slight flush in her cheeks, as though she carried a secret of her own. The conversation turned to the evening's arrangements, with Lady Dupont outlining the ball's schedule dinner, followed by dancing, with guests arriving from London and the surrounding estates. Poirot listened, his mind weaving a tapestry of possibilities. The letter, the family tensions, the grandeur of Dupont Hollow were pieces of a puzzle that he, Hercule Poirot, was determined to solve. As they rose to retire to their rooms, Poirot paused at the drawing-room's threshold, his gaze lingering on a portrait above the fireplace. It depicted Lord Charles Dupont, a stern man with piercing eyes, his hand resting on a globe as though claiming the world itself. A man of ambition, Poirot remarked softly. Lady Dupont followed his gaze. Yes, Charles built an empire, but not without cost. I sometimes wonder if his shadow still lingers. Poirot said nothing, but his eyes gleamed with the certainty that the shadow was not Charles's alone. The rain pattered against the windows, and Dupont Hall, for all its splendor, seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the dance that would unravel its secrets. Chapter 3. The guests assemble. The evening descended upon Dupont Hall with a velvet hush, the drizzle of the afternoon giving way to a clear, star-strewn sky that promised a night of elegance and intrigue. Within the grand ballroom, chandeliers blazed with 1,000 prisms, casting a radiant glow over polished parquet floors and walls adorned with gilded mirrors. The air was thick with the scent of hothouse roses and the murmur of anticipation as guests began to arrive, their footsteps echoing in the vast hall like the opening notes of a symphony. Hercule Poirot, impeccably attired in a black evening suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming, stood near a marble pillar, his sharp eyes surveying the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. Beside him, Captain Hastings, resplendent in his own dinner jacket, could scarcely contain his admiration for the spectacle. "By Jove, Poirot," Hastings whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "This is the sort of thing you read about in novels. Look at the place fit for royalty." Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his amusement at Hastings' enthusiasm. "Mon ami, beauty is but a facade. It is the hearts within. This room that interests Hercule Poirot. Observe, if you please, and tell me what you see." Hastings scanned the growing crowd, his brow furrowing as he attempted to match Poirot's keen perception. The guests, a glittering assembly of London's elite and local gentry, moved with the practiced ease of those accustomed to wealth and status. Footmen in livery glided among them, offering trays of champagne in crystal flutes, while a string quartet played a soft Vivaldi air from a raised dais. Yet beneath the polished surface, Poirot detected currents of tension, like ripples disturbing a still pond. At the center of the room stood Lady Eleanor Dupont, her emerald gown catching the light as she greeted her guests with a smile that was both gracious and guarded. Her silver-streaked hair gleamed under the chandeliers, and her movements carried the effortless grace of a woman who had navigated society's intricacies for decades. Yet Poirot noted the slight tightening of her fingers around her fan, a telltale sign of the unease she had confided earlier. Among the first to draw Poirot's attention was Sir Reginald Dupont, Lady Dupont's brother-in-law, a burly man with a florid complexion and a booming laugh that masked a restless energy. His evening suit, though finely tailored, was slightly rumpled, as though he had dressed in haste. He stood near a buffet table laden with delicacies, his hand clutching a glass of whiskey as he spoke animatedly to a group of gentlemen. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he observed Sir Reginald's gestures to broad, to forced, as though compensating for some inner disquiet. "A man who gambles with more than cards," Poirot murmured to himself, recalling Lady Dupont's mention of his debts. Nearby, Clara Dupont, the niece, moved through the crowd with a radiant charm that drew admiring glances. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her gown of pale blue silk shimmered with every step. Yet her eyes, bright and searching, lingered not on her fiancé, Mr. Victor Langston, but on a young man standing apart from the throng. This was Julian Marsh, an artist of modest means, whose bohemian air marked by a loosely tied cravat and a velvet jacket set him apart from the formal attire of the other guests. Clara's glances toward him were furtive, almost conspiratorial, and Poirot noted the way her fingers brushed against a sapphire pendant at her throat, a gesture of nervous habit. Victor Langston, the banker, stood stiffly at Clara's side, his thin lips set in a line of perpetual disapproval. His dark suit was immaculate, but his demeanor suggested a man more at ease with ledgers than laughter. When Clara excused herself to speak with a guest, Langston's eyes followed her, not with affection, but with a cold calculation that Poirot found telling. A man who controls, but does not love, Poirot mused, filing the observation away. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow, Lady Dupont's cousin, was a contrast in both appearance and manner. Her gown of burgundy velvet was ostentatious, its heavy embroidery clashing with the understated elegance of the room. Her laughter, loud and frequent, rang false to Poirot's ear, and her sharp eyes darted toward Lady Dupont with a mixture of envy and resentment. She hovered near a group of older matrons, her conversation laced with barbed remarks about the cost of maintaining Dupont Hall. A woman who covets what she cannot have, Poirot noted, his gaze lingering on her clenched hands. Dr. Felix Mop, the family physician, was a quieter presence, his slight frame almost lost among the taller guests. His spectacles glinted as he adjusted them repeatedly, a nervous tic that Poirot found intriguing. Marwood's conversation with a dowager was polite but distracted, his eyes straying toward Lady Dupont with an intensity that bordered on fixation. Poirot's mind registered this, along with the doctor's proximity to a side table where a silver cigarette case lay a detail that might prove significant. Miss Lydia Crane, Lady Dupont's secretary, moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her youth. Her plain grey gown and unadorned hair suggested a deliberate effort to blend into the background. Yet her eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing. She carried a small notebook, jotting down names as guests arrived, and her deference to Lady Dupont was marked by a subtle protectiveness. When she passed near Poirot, her glance was brief but assessing, as though she recognized his reputation. A mind that sees more than it speaks, Poirot thought, intrigued by her reserve. As the quartet struck up a livelier tune, the guests began to pair for the opening dance, their movements a choreographed display of social harmony. Yet Poirot, standing apart, saw the cracks beneath the surface. Sir Reginald's heated exchange with Langston in a corner, their voices low but tense. Clara's fleeting smile at Julian as she took Langston's arm. Mrs. Harrow's pointed remark to a guest about Lady Dupont's extravagance, and Dr. Marwood's lingering gaze, now fixed on the hostess as she glided across the room. Even Miss Crane, pausing to adjust a floral arrangement, seemed to listen more than she worked, her ear tuned to the undercurrents of the gathering. Hastings, oblivious to these subtleties, nudged Poirot. Quite a crowd, eh? Clara's a stunner, isn't she? Pity she's tied to that Langston fellow. He looks like he'd rather be balancing accounts than dancing. Poirot's lips curved slightly. Mon cher Hastings, you see the surface, but not the depths. Each guest here carries a story, and some, I suspect, carry secrets. The letter Lady Dupont received it is a thread that binds this assembly, and we must unravel it before the night is done. The music swelled, and Lady Dupont took the floor with a distinguished guest, her smile unwavering despite the weight of the anonymous threat. Poirot's gaze returned to the letter, which he had slipped into his pocket earlier that day. Its words, "Your last dance approaches, Lady Dupont. Debts must be paid," echoed in his mind, a warning that this glittering evening might end. In discord, he adjusted his cufflinks, his movements precise, and prepared to observe, to listen, to deduce. The guests assembled, the stage was set, and Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, stood ready to uncover the shadows lurking within Dupont Hall's radiant splendor. Chapter 4. The dance begins. The ballroom of Dupont Hall pulsed with life. its chandeliers casting a golden glow over the swirling couples who moved in time to the lilting strains of a Strauss waltz. The parquet floor gleamed beneath the dancers' feet, reflecting the flicker of candlelight and the flash of jewels. Laughter and conversation wove through the music, creating a tapestry of elegance that seemed, for a moment, to banish the shadows of Lady Dupont's ominous letter. Yet Hercule Poirot, standing near a velvet-draped alcove, remained untouched by the festive air, his keen eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. Beside him, Captain Hastings sipped a glass of champagne, his gaze lingering on the graceful figure of Clara Dupont as she twirled in the arms of her fiancé, Victor Langston. "Splendid show," Poirot Hastings remarked, his voice warm with admiration. "You'd think nothing could go wrong on a night like this. Everyone's in high spirits." Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his disagreement. "Mon cher Hastings, the high spirits, they are but a mask. Beneath the laughter, there is tension calm, un corde tendu, a string stretched tight, ready to snap. Observe, if you please, the faces, the gestures. All is not as it seems." Hastings followed Poirot's gaze, trying to see beyond the surface glamour. The ballroom was a spectacle of wealth and refinement. Women in shimmering gowns of silk and satin, men in crisp black evening suits, their movements choreographed by years of social training. Lady Eleanor Dupont, radiant in her emerald gown, led the dance with a silver-haired diplomat, her smile a perfect blend of warmth and poise. Yet Poirot noted the slight rigidity in her posture, the way her eyes darted briefly to the edges of the room, as though searching for an unseen threat. Sir Reginald Dupont, Lady Dupont's brother-in-law, stood near the refreshment table, his florid face flushed from whiskey rather than exertion. He laughed too loudly at a jest from a fellow guest, but his eyes were restless, flitting toward Lady Dupont with a mixture of resentment and calculation. Poirot recalled her mention of his debts, a motive, perhaps, though Sir Reginald's bluster suggested a man more prone to blunder than cunning. Clara Dupont, her blue silk gown catching the light, moved with effortless grace, but her smile faltered when Langston's hand tightened on her waist. The banker's expression was one of cold propriety, his eyes scanning the room as though assessing its worth rather than its beauty. Across the floor, Julian Marsh, the artist, leaned against a pillar, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. His gaze followed Clara, unguarded and intense, a stark contrast to Langston's detachment. Poirot noted the sapphire pendant at Clara's throat, her fingers brushing it, again a gesture of anxiety or longing. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow, in her ostentatious burgundy gown, danced with a portly squire, her laughter ringing out like a bell. But her eyes held a glint of malice as they lingered on Lady Dupont. The cousin's envy, Poirot mused, was as palpable as the perfume she wore, a scent that clashed with the roses adorning the room. Dr. Felix Marwood, the family physician, hovered near the edge of the dance floor, his spectacles glinting as he adjusted them nervously. He declined invitations to dance, preferring to watch, his attention fixed on Lady Dupont with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Miss Lydia Crane, the secretary, moved discreetly among the guests, her grey gown blending into the background. She carried a small silver tray, offering drinks or exchanging quiet words with Lady Dupont's staff. Her eyes, however, were sharp, missing nothing, and Poirot sensed in her a mind as observant as his own, though cloaked in humility. The music reached a crescendo, the waltz drawing to a close, and the dancers paused to applaud. Lady Dupont, now at the center of the room, raised a hand to signal the quartet for the next piece. The clock on the mantel, its gilt hands gleaming, struck 10, its chimes resonating through the ballroom. At that precise moment, the lights flickered, a brief stutter that plunged the room into darkness. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a piercing scream, a woman's voice, sharp with terror. The darkness lasted mere seconds, but when the chandeliers blazed to life again, chaos erupted. Lady Eleanor Dupont lay crumpled on the dance floor, her emerald gown stained with a spreading crimson bloom. A slender dagger, its hilt ornate with filigree, protruded from her chest. Her green eyes, wide with shock, stared unseeing at the ceiling, and her hand clutched the air as though grasping for life. Screams and shouts filled the room. A woman fainted, her glass shattering on the floor. Sir Reginald bellowed for order, his voice drowned by the clamor. Clara broke free from Langston's grasp, rushing to her aunt's side, her cry of anguish cutting through the din. Dr. Marwood pushed through the crowd, his medical instincts overriding his nervous demeanor, but one look at Lady Dupont confirmed the worst. He shook his head, his face ashen. Poirot moved swiftly, his small frame weaving through the panicked guests with surprising agility. "Messieurs, et madame," he called, his voice ringing with authority. "Remain where you are. This is now a matter for Hercule Poirot. No one is to leave this room." The guests froze, their faces a mix of shock, fear, and curiosity. Hastings, at Poirot's side, stared at the scene, his usual cheer replaced by grim determination. "Good Lord, Poirot," he whispered. "She's gone. Murdered, right in the middle of the ball." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes scanning the body, the dagger, the crowd. "A bold act, committed under our very noses. But boldness betrays carelessness, and carelessness leaves clues. We shall find them." He knelt beside Lady Dupont, careful not to disturb the scene. The dagger, he noted, was antique, its blade sharp and precise, driven with force into her heart. Her face, even in death, retained a trace of her elegance, but her lips were parted, as though she had tried to speak her killer's name. The crimson stain on her gown spread slowly, a stark contrast to the emerald silk, and Poirot's gaze lingered on a single pearl earring that had fallen to the floor, its twin still in place. Grayson, the butler, appeared at Poirot's elbow, his composure strained but intact. "Monsieur Poirot, shall I send for the police?" "Oui, at once," Poirot replied, "and ensure no one leaves the ballroom." "The exits, how many are there?" "3, sir," Grayson answered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "The main doors, the terrace door, and a service passage to the kitchens. All were locked, save the terrace door, which was left ajar for air." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Tiens, the terrace door most interesting. See that it is secured now. S'il vous plaît." As Grayson hurried to comply, Hastings leaned closer. "Could it have been an outsider, Poirot? Someone sneaking in during the blackout?" "Possible, but improbable," Poirot murmured. "The letter, the setting, the dagger all suggests a personal vendetta, mon ami. The killer is among us, hidden in plain sight." The guests, now hushed, watched Poirot with a mix of awe and apprehension. Clara, kneeling beside her aunt, sobbed quietly, while Langston stood over her, his face unreadable. Sir Reginald, his whiskey forgotten, muttered curses under his breath. Mrs. Harrow, her burgundy gown stark against the pale crowd, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes gleaming with something other than grief. Dr. Marwood, still near the body, adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling. Miss Crane, standing at the edge of the group, watched in silence, her notebook clutched tightly. Poirot rose, his expression calm but resolute. The dance had begun, but it had ended in death. The stage was set, the players assembled, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, would ensure that the killer's final bow was taken not in triumph, but in justice. Chapter 5. The scene of the crime, the ballroom of Dupont Hall. Moments ago, a stage of glittering revelry had transformed into a tableau of tragedy. The chandeliers still blazed, their light casting harsh shadows over the motionless form of Lady Eleanor Dupont, her emerald gown now marred by a crimson stain that spread like an accusation across the polished parquet. The air, once filled with the strains of a waltz, was now thick with the murmurs of shock and the acrid scent of fear. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the chaos, his small figure radiating an authority that quelled the rising panic. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the scene with the precision of a surgeon. Each detail a clue in the puzzle of Lady Dupont's murder. Captain Hastings, pale but resolute, stood at Poirot's side, his usual buoyancy replaced by a grim determination. "It's monstrous, Poirot," he whispered, his voice low to avoid the ears of the gathered guests. "To strike her down in the middle of a dance right under our noses." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his tone calm but laced with intensity. "The audacity of the act is its own revelation. The killer wished to make a statement, but in doing so, they have left traces for Hercule Poirot to uncover. We must proceed with method." The guests, corralled by Poirot's earlier command, stood in uneasy clusters, their faces a gallery of emotions, shock, fear, curiosity, and, in some, a flicker of guilt. Clara Dupont knelt beside her aunt's body, her blue silk gown pooling around her as she stifled sobs. Victor Langston, her fiancé, hovered nearby, his expression unreadable, though his hands clenched briefly at his sides. Sir Reginald Dupont, his florid face drained of colour, muttered incoherently, his whiskey glass abandoned on a nearby table. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow, her burgundy gown stark against the pale crowd, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting between the body and the other guests. Dr. Felix Marwood, the family physician, lingered close, his spectacles fogging slightly as he bent over Lady Dupont, confirming what was already evident. She was beyond saving. Miss Lydia Crane, the secretary, stood at the edge of the group, her grey gown blending into the shadows, her notebook clutched tightly, her face a mask of quiet observation. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands hovering over the scene without touching, his gaze methodical. The dagger, its ornate hilt glinting under the chandelier light, was embedded deeply in Lady Dupont's chest, a precise strike to the heart. The blade was slender, its design antique, suggesting it was no ordinary weapon. Poirot noted the absence of fingerprints on the hilt, a detail that spoke of preparation rather than impulse. Lady Dupont's face, frozen in death, retained a haunting elegance, her green eyes wide with shock, her lips parted as though she had tried to speak in a final moment. A single pearl earring lay on the floor beside her, its twin still fixed in her ears. A small but significant anomaly. Tiens, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing as he studied the earring. A pearl does not fall without cause. Was it torn in a struggle or placed to mislead? He turned his attention to the dance floor, moments ago alive with movement, was now a crime scene. its polished surface marred by scuff marks and a few scattered rose petals, likely trampled in the chaos of the blackout. The terrace door, as Grayson had noted, stood slightly ajar, its frame admitting a cool draft that stirred the heavy curtains. Poirot's gaze lingered on the door, his mind turning over the possibility of an outsider. Though the letter's personal tone suggested otherwise, Inspector Japp, summoned from Scotland Yard, arrived with commendable speed, his familiar figure bustling through the main doors with 2 constables in tow. His weathered face, usually creased with a wry grin, was grim as he surveyed the scene. "Blimey, Poirot," he said, tipping his hat. "You do pick the lively parties. What's the situation?" "A murder, Monsieur Japp," Poirot replied, rising to his feet with a grace that belied the gravity of the moment. Lady Eleanor Dupont, struck down by a dagger during a brief blackout. The killer acted with precision, and the weapon, it is no common blade. Observe. Japp knelt beside the body, his practiced eye taking in the details. Nasty business. Antique dagger, by the look of it. Family heirloom, maybe, and no one saw a thing. The lights were extinguished for mere seconds, Poirot said. Enough time for the act, but not for escape, unless... He glanced toward the terrace door. "Grayson, the butler, informs me that door was ajar. We must investigate." Japp nodded, gesturing to a constable to secure the door. "Right, let's get the facts straight. Who was where when the lights went out?" Poirot turned to Grayson, who stood nearby, his composure fraying at the edges. "Monsieur Grayson, the lights, how were they extinguished?" Grayson cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly. "The fuse box, sir, in the servants' quarters. It controls the ballroom's lighting. Someone must have tampered with it, though I cannot say who. The staff were all at their posts. And the terrace door," Poirot pressed. "You said it was left ajar for air. Was it guarded?" Grayson hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "No, sir, it was unlocked, as Lady Dupont preferred fresh air during the ball. But no one was seen entering or leaving." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mercy, Monsieur Grayson. That will be all for now." As Grayson withdrew, Poirot moved to the terrace door, his steps measured. The door opened onto a stone terrace overlooking the gardens, where the night air was sharp with the scent of wet earth and roses. The flagstones were damp from the earlier rain, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught a faint smudger, partial footprint, perhaps, or the drag of a shoe. He crouched, examining it closely, noting its size and shape. "A clue, mon ami," he said, to Hastings, who had followed him. "But whether it leads to the killer or a distraction, we shall see." Back in the ballroom, Japp organized the constables to take statements, while Poirot continued his examination. He noted the positions of the guests during the blackout, piecing together their alibis. Clara claimed she was dancing with Langston, though her eyes avoided Poirot's as she spoke. Langston corroborated her story, but his account was vague, mentioning a momentary confusion in the dark. Sir Reginald insisted he was near the refreshment table, a claim supported by a footman, though his flushed face suggested agitation. Mrs. Harrow said she was speaking with a guest near the quartet, her alibi unverified. Dr. Marwood, still adjusting his spectacles, claimed he was by the punch table. A detail Miss Crane quietly confirmed, though her expression remained guarded. Poirot's attention returned to the dagger. "This weapon," he said to Japp, "it is not one carried casually. Its design suggests significance, perhaps, from the Dupont collection. We must ascertain its origin." Japp nodded. I'll have Grayson check the house inventory. If it's an heirloom, someone had access to it. As the constables began to cordon off the area, Poirot stepped back, his mind a whirl of details. The dagger's precision, the blackout's timing, the terrace door's vulnerability, the fallen earring. The letter, still in his pocket, weighed heavily, its words, "Your last dance approaches, Lady Dupont." Debts must be paid, echoing as a grim prophecy fulfilled. The killer had struck with theatrical boldness, but Poirot knew that such boldness often masked a flaw, a misstep that his little grey cells would uncover. He turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The scene is set, mon ami. The players are in place, and the act is done. Now we must find the script that led to this tragedy." The ballroom, once a place of joy, was now a stage of suspicion, and Hercule Poirot, with his unrelenting logic, stood ready to peel back its layers to reveal the truth. Chapter 6. Motives and Alibis. The grand ballroom of Dupont Hall, its chandeliers still aglow, had become a silent arena of suspicion. The air heavy with the aftermath of Lady Eleanor Dupont's murder. The guests corralled by Inspector Japs. Constables stood in uneasy clusters, their earlier elegance now tarnished by fear and mistrust. Hercule Poirot, his compact figure a beacon of calm amidst the turmoil, moved with deliberate precision, his dark eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every glance, every gesture. Captain Hastings, at his side, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his usual optimism subdued by the grim reality of the crime. "Dash it all, Poirot," Hastings muttered, his voice low. "To think we were waltzing 1 minute, and now, this. How do you even begin to untangle such a mess?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Mon cher Hastings, a mess is merely a puzzle in disarray. With method and order, we shall arrange the pieces. The motives, the alibis, they are the threads we must weave into truth." Inspector Japp, his notebook open, was already taking preliminary statements, his gruff efficiency a counterpoint to Poirot's meticulous observation. The constables had secured the ballroom's exits, ensuring no one could leave, and the terrace door, now firmly locked, stood as a silent witness to the night's events. Poirot, however, knew that the answers lay not in the physical space alone, but in the hearts and minds of those present. He had requested a private room for interviews, and Grayson, the butler, led them to a small library adjacent to the ballroom, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes and a single window overlooking the darkened gardens. The library was a haven of quiet, its oak-panelled walls absorbing the tension that followed Poirot and Hastings inside. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows over a long mahogany table where Poirot took his seat, his gloved hands folded neatly before him. Japp stood nearby, ready to record, while Hastings hovered, eager to assist but aware of his limitations in Poirot's cerebral domain. "Messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, "we shall proceed with order. Each guest will be questioned, their alibis examined, their motives uncovered. The murder of Lady Dupont was no act of chance, it was planned, precise, and personal. Let us begin. Sir Reginald Dupont, sir." Reginald was the first to be summoned, his heavy footsteps echoing as he entered, his florid face still pale from shock. He sank into the chair opposite Poirot, his hands gripping the armrests, a faint tremor betraying his unease. "This is a damned tragedy," he growled, his voice rough with whiskey and grief. "Eleanor was stubborn, but she didn't deserve this." Poirot's eyes, sharp as a blade, studied him. Monsieur, you were near the refreshment table when the lights went out. Nest see, a footman confirms this, yet your agitation is evident. Tell me, what was your relation with Lady Dupont? Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. She was my brother's widow. We had our differences money mostly. Charles left her everything, and well, I've had a run of bad luck at the tables. Asked her for a loan, and she refused. Said I'd squandered enough. But murder. I'm no killer, Poirot. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. And this disagreement, it was heated. Perhaps you felt she owed you, as her brother-in-law, sir. Reginald's eyes flashed. I won't deny I was angry, but I didn't touch her. I was by the table, like I said, grabbing another drink when the lights went out. Couldn't see a blasted thing. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Mercy, Sir Reginald. You may go for now. As Sir Reginald lumbered out, Poirot murmured to Hastings, a man of passion, but not precision. His motive is clear money, but the dagger's strike was too exact for his clumsy hands. Clara Dupont Clara entered next, her blue silk gown creased from kneeling beside her aunt's body. Her auburn curls were slightly dishevelled, and her eyes, red from tears, held a mix of grief and defiance. She sat with a grace that belied her distress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mademoiselle Poirot began gently. You were dancing with Monsieur Langston when the lights failed. Yet your heart, it seems, lies elsewhere. Tell me of your aunt, and of this tension. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she met Poirot's gaze. Aunt Eleanor was kind to me, always. She raised me after my parents died, but she didn't approve. Victor thought him too cold, too ambitious. She wanted me to be happy, not trapped. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And this happiness, it lies with Monsieur Julien Marsh, the artist. You were seen glancing at him during the dance. Clara's fingers brushed the sapphire pendant at her throat, a nervous habit Poirot had noted earlier. Julien understands me, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, but I was with Victor when the lights went out. I felt him stumble in the dark, and then, the scream. Poirot tilted his head. You heard the scream, yet you did not move toward your aunt at once. I froze, Clara said, her voice breaking. It was so sudden. By the time I reached her, she was choked back a sob. Mercy, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his tone kind but firm. As Clara left, he turned to Hastings. Her grief is genuine, but her alibi depends on Langston. And her heart, it pulls her elsewhere. We must watch her closely. Victor Langston entered with the air of a man accustomed to control. His dark suit immaculate, his thin lips set in a line of displeasure. He sat stiffly, his hands resting on the table, his gaze cold and assessing. Monsieur Langston, Poirot said, his voice deceptively mild. You were dancing with Mademoiselle Clara when the tragedy occurred. Yet your account, it is vague. Tell me, what passed in those moments of darkness? Langston's eyes flickered, but his voice was steady. The lights went out, and there was confusion. Clara stumbled, and I steadied her. Then the scream. I didn't know it was Lady Dupont until the lights returned. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table. And your feelings toward Lady Dupont? She disapproved of your engagement. None. Langston's jaw tightened. She had her opinions, but I respected her. She was influential. Her death is a loss to us all. Poirot noted the careful choice of words. And this influence, did it threaten your ambitions? Perhaps. Langston's eyes narrowed. I'm a banker, Monsieur Poirot, not a murderer. I was with Clara, as she said. You'll find no fault in my actions. As Langston departed, murmured to Japp, a man who speaks with precision, yet reveals nothing. His alibi is tied to Clara, but his heart is tied to power. We shall see. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow swept into the room, her burgundy gown rustling, her expression a mix of indignation and feigned sorrow. She sat with a flourish, her handkerchief clutched dramatically. Madame Poirot began, "You were near the quartet when the lights failed. Yet your manner suggests a personal grievance with Lady Dupont." Mrs. Harrow's lips pursed. "Eleanor was my cousin, but she was selfish. Charles's fortune should have been shared with the family, not hoarded by her. She flaunted her wealth, disballed such extravagance, but I didn't kill her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And your position in the darkness, who can confirm?" I was speaking with Lady Ashford," Mrs. Harrow snapped. "She'll tell you. I heard the scream, like everyone else, and stayed where I was." Poirot nodded, dismissing her. "To Hastings," he said. "Her envy is a motive, but her alibi is weak. Lady Ashford, we must question her. Dr. Felix Marwood died." Marwood entered, his spectacles glinting nervously as he adjusted them. His slight frame seemed to shrink under gaze, and his hands fidgeted with a pocket watch. Dr. Poirot said, "You were by the punch table, as Mademoiselle Crane confirms, yet your manner is troubled. What was your connection to Lady Dupont?" Marwood swallowed hard. "She was my patient and a friend. I cared for her health since Charles's death. I was shocked when the lights went out, heard the scream, but couldn't see anything." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting, and this care, it was purely professional. Marwood's cheeks flushed. "Of course, I respected her deeply." As Marwood left, Poirot murmured, "His nerves betray him. There is more to his respect than he admits." Miss Crane entered last, her grey gown unassuming, her notebook still in hand. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, met Poirot's without flinching. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "you confirm Dr. Marwood's alibi, yet you are observant. What did you see in the darkness?" Miss Crane's voice was steady. "I was near the punch table, ensuring the staff were in order. When the lights went out, I heard the scream, but it was too dark to move. I saw nothing." Poirot tilted his head. "And Lady Dupont, she trusted you?" "She did," Miss Crane said simply. "I managed her correspondence, her affairs. She was cautious lately." Mercy, Poirot said, dismissing her. To Japp and Hastings, he said, "Her calm is remarkable. She sees more than she says." The interviews concluded. Poirot leaned back, his mind a whirl of motives and alibis. Sir Reginald's debts, Clara's divided heart, Langston's ambition, Mrs. Harrow's envy, Marwood's obsession, Crane's reticence, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit. The dagger, the blackout, the letter, they pointed to a killer. Among the guests and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the truth that lay hidden in the shadows of Dupont Hall. Chapter 7. The letter's origin. The library of Dupont Hall, with its oak-panelled walls and the soft crackle of the fire, provided a haven of quiet amid the storm of suspicion that had engulfed the estate. Hercule Poirot sat at the mahogany table, his gloved hands resting lightly on its polished surface. The anonymous letter that had so troubled Lady Eleanor Dupont spread before him. Its stark words, "Your last dance approaches, Lady Dupont. Debts must be paid. seemed to pulse with menace, a grim prophecy now fulfilled in the most brutal manner. The paper, plain but of good quality, bore the faint smudge of ink Poirot had noted earlier, a detail that whispered of carelessness in the killer's otherwise meticulous plan. Captain Hastings, standing by the window, gazed out at the darkened gardens, his face etched with unease, while Inspector Japp paced near the fireplace, his notebook filled with the alibis and motives of the assembled guests. "Dash it, Poirot," Hastings said, turning from the window. "That letter's the key, isn't it? Whoever wrote it knew something was coming. But how do we trace it?" Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man whose mind was a finely tuned instrument. "Mon cher Hastings, the letter is indeed a thread in our tapestry of crime. Its origin will reveal much, for it was typed, not handwritten, a choice that speaks of intent to conceal. We must find the machine that gave it life." Japp paused, his pacing, his weathered face creased with determination. "Right then, Grayson mentioned a typewriter in the study. Shall we have a look?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, rising with a grace that belied the gravity of the moment. "But we must also consider the hands that touched it. The letter is a weapon as surely as the dagger, and its wielder is among us." The trio made their way to the study, a room of understated elegance located down a corridor lined with ancestral portraits. The study's door, heavy oak with brass fittings, opened to reveal a space that was both functional and refined. A large desk of polished walnut dominated the room, its surface cluttered with papers. A silver inkstand and a Remington typewriter, its black keys gleaming under the light of a single green-shaded lamp. Bookshelves lined the walls, their volumes ranging from financial ledgers to classic literature, and a window overlooked the same gardens visible from the library, now shrouded in night. Poirot approached the typewriter, his gloved fingers hovering over the keys without touching. He examined the machine with the precision of an archaeologist, noting the slight wear on certain letters, particularly the E and T, which matched the impressions on the threatening letter. "Tiens," he murmured, "this is indeed the instrument, but who played it?" Miss Lydia Crane, summoned at Poirot's request, entered the study, her grey gown as unobtrusive as ever, her sharp eyes meeting his with a calm that bordered on defiance. "Mademoiselle Crane," Poirot began, his voice soft but probing, "you managed Lady Dupont's correspondence. This typewriter, was it used solely by you?" Miss Crane nodded, her hands clasped before her. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I use it for Lady Dupont's letters, invitations, and household accounts. No one else has access, to my knowledge." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "To your knowledge, oui. Yet this letter, it was typed here, and its message was one of malice. Have you noticed any irregularities in the study? Visitors, perhaps, or papers disturbed?" Miss Crane hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "The study is kept locked when not in use, but 2 days ago I found the door ajar. I thought perhaps Grayson had been cleaning, but he denied it. Nothing seemed missing, so I thought little of it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Mercy, mademoiselle. That is most illuminating. You may go." As Miss Crane departed, Poirot turned to the typewriter, his fingers brushing the keys lightly. He paused, his eyes catching a faint smudge on the space-barra trace of red, barely visible, like the ghost of a fingerprint. "Voila," he said, pointing to the mark. "Paint, perhaps. Red and fresh enough to suggest recent use." Hastings leaned closer, his brow furrowing, paint. That's odd. Who'd have paint on their hands in a place like this? Poirot's mind flashed to Julian Marsh, the artist, whose velvet jacket and bohemian air had stood out among the formal guests. Monsieur Marsh, he is a painter, n'est-ce pas? His hands, they are often stained with the colors of his craft. We must speak with him. Jap, jotting a note, nodded. I'll have him brought in, but paint's a thin lead. Poirot could be a servant, or even a guest with a hobby. Nan, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice firm. The paint is a clue, and clues do not lie. They speak, if we listen. Julian Marsh was summoned, his lanky frame slouching slightly as he entered, his eyes wary. His velvet jacket was slightly rumpled, and his cravat hung loose, as though he had tugged at it in agitation. Poirot noted the faint red stain on his cuff, a match for the smudge on the typewriter. Monsieur Marsh, Poirot began, gesturing to a chair. You are an artist. Oui. Your hands, they work with paint. Tell me, have you used this typewriter? Julian's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. The typewriter? No, I haven't. I'm not much for writing sketches, are my trade. He hesitated, then added, though I did come to the study a few days ago. Clara asked me to leave a note for her, a private matter. I used a pen, not the typewriter. Poirot's mustache twitched. A note for Mademoiselle Clara, yet you touched the typewriter. The paint on your cuff, it matches a mark on this machine. Julian's face flushed, his hands clenching. I might have brushed against it, but I didn't type anything. That letter, I didn't write it. I'd never harm Lady Dupont. She was kind to me, let me stay here to paint. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting, and this kindness, it extended to your affection for Mademoiselle Clara, a forbidden romance, perhaps opposed by Lady Dupont. Julian's jaw tightened. Clara and I, we care for each other. Lady Dupont knew, but she didn't forbid it. She wanted Clara to be happy. Mercy, Monsieur Marsh, Poirot said, dismissing him. As Julian left, Poirot turned to Jap and Hastings. The paint links him to the typewriter, but his denial is too vehement. The letter may be a distraction, crafted to point suspicion elsewhere. Jap scratched his head. So, what's the game? Someone used the typewriter to frame the artist. Perhaps, Poirot mused. Or the letter serves a deeper purpose, unsettle Lady Dupont, to make her vulnerable. We must examine the study further. A thorough search revealed little. Else, the desk held routine correspondence, bills, and invitations, all in Miss Crane's precise handwriting. But Poirot's sharp eyes caught a faint irregularity, a drawer that sat slightly askew, as though recently opened and not fully closed. Inside, beneath a stack of papers, he found a small key, its brass surface etched with the Dupont crest. Tiens, Poirot said, holding it up. A key, perhaps to the case that held the dagger. Grayson said it was kept locked, with only he and Lady Dupont having access. Yet here it is, hidden but not secure. Hastings frowned. So someone took it to get the dagger. But who'd know where to find it? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Someone close, mon ami. Someone who knew the house, its secrets, its treasures. The letter, the dagger, the blackout, they are parts of a single plan, and we are close to its heart. As they returned to the library, Poirot's mind churned with possibilities. The paint on the typewriter pointed to Julian, but its presence seemed too convenient, too deliberate. Miss Crane's account of the ajar door suggested an intruder, yet Her calm demeanor hinted at hidden knowledge. The key, the letter, the smudge of paint tool were threads in a web of deceit, and Poirot, with his unerring logic, was determined to trace them to their source. The night was far from over, and the truth, he knew, was waiting in the shadows of Dupont Hall. Chapter 8. A Hidden Truth. The Library of Dupont Hall, with its oak-panelled walls and the steady crackle of the fire, had become Hercule Poirot's sanctuary, a place where his little grey cells could weave order from the chaos of Lady Eleanor. Dupont's murder. The room's quiet elegance stood in stark contrast to the turmoil that had engulfed the estate, the air still heavy with the shock of the ballroom tragedy. Poirot sat at the mahogany table, his gloved hands folded, the anonymous letter and the small brass key with the Dupont crest before him. The letter's menacing words, "Your last dance approaches, Lady Dupont. Debts must be paid," and the faint smudge of red paint on the typewriter lingered in his mind, as did the antique dagger that had ended Lady Dupont's life. Captain Hastings paced near the bookshelves, his restlessness a counterpoint to Poirot's calm, while Inspector Japp, notebook in hand, leaned against the mantel, his weathered face creased with frustration. "This is a devil of a case." "Poirot," Japp said, his voice gruff. "We've got alibis that don't quite hold, motives aplenty, and that blasted dagger Grayson's checking if it's from the family collection. But we're no closer to pinning the killer." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. "Faintly, mon, cher Japp, we are closer than you think. The truth, it hides in the details, the key, the paint, the letter. They are not separate clues, but parts of a single design. We must now uncover the heart of this design." Hastings stopped pacing, his brow furrowed. "That key you found in the study, Poirot, it's got to be for the daggers case, hasn't it? But who'd have access to it, besides Grayson and Lady Dupont?" "Precisement, mon ami," Poirot replied, holding up the key, its brass catching the firelight. "This key unlocks more than a case, it unlocks a motive. Let us examine the dagger's origin, for it is no ordinary weapon." Grayson, summoned once more, entered with a ledger from the estate's inventory. His silver hair was slightly dishevelled, a rare lapse in his impeccable demeanour, and his pale blue eyes avoided Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice steady but strained, "the dagger is indeed from the Dupont collection, kept in a locked case in the library's antechamber. Only Lady Dupont and I held keys, and mine remains in my possession." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, Monsieur Grayson, we find a key hidden in the study, where it should not be. Was the case disturbed? Forced, perhaps?" Grayson shook his head. "No, sir. I checked after the tragedy. The case was intact, locked as it should be. The dagger must have been taken earlier, with the key." "Merci," Poirot said, dismissing the butler. As Grayson left, Poirot turned to Japp. The dagger was removed with care, not force. The killer had access, or they stole the key somewhere intimate with the house's secrets. Japp nodded, jotting a note. "Right, so we're looking at someone close family, staff, maybe a trusted guest, but that letter's still nagging me. That paint smudge points to the artist, Marsh, but it feels too neat." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table. The paint is a clue, but perhaps a misdirection. Let us search the terrace, where the door was ajar. There may be more to find." The trio moved to the stone terrace, its flagstones still damp from the earlier rain, the air sharp with the scent of wet roses. The night was quiet, save for the distant hum of the ballroom. where the guests remained under the watchful eyes of Japp's constables. Poirot's sharp gaze swept the terrace, noting the partial footprint he had seen earlier, smudge, too, indistinct to identify. But near the edge of the terrace, half hidden by a potted fern, he spotted a new detail, a cigarette stub, its tip stained with a faint trace of ash. He crouched, careful not to disturb it, and examined it closely. Poirot murmured, lifting the stub with a handkerchief. A cigarette, and not a common brand. This is a Sobranie, favoured by those with particular tastes. Hastings leaned closer. Sobranie, I've seen those before. Didn't Dr. Marwood have a silver cigarette case on the table near him? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisement, mon ami. The good doctor, with his nervous tics and his lingering gaze on Lady Dupont. This cigarette places him on the terrace, perhaps at the moment of the crime. Japp frowned, but Marwood said he was by the punch table, and that Crane girl backed him up. Are you saying he slipped out during the blackout? Perhaps, Poirot said, slipping the cigarette into his pocket. Or perhaps the cigarette was left to mislead. We must question him again, but first, let us return to the study. There is another truth hidden there. Back in the study, Poirot's attention turned to the desk, where the typewriter still sat, its keys silent witnesses to the threatening letter. He rifled through the papers with care, his gloved hands moving with surgical precision. Beneath a stack of invitations, he found a small, leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with cryptic entries, dates, sums, and initials that suggested payments to an unknown party. The amounts were substantial, and the most recent entry, dated a week prior, bore the initials R.D. Voilà, Poirot said, holding up the ledger. A hidden truth. These payments extortion, perhaps. And R.D., could it be Sir Reginald Dupont? Japp's eyes widened. Blackmail, that'd give him a motive, all right. He admitted to asking Lady Dupont for money, but if he was squeezing her for more, Poirot nodded. We must verify. Let us confront Sir Reginald with this. Sir Reginald was summoned, his florid face now haggard, his eyes bloodshot. He sank into a chair, his hands trembling as Poirot presented the ledger. Monsieur, these entries suggest payments. To R.D. Were you extracting money from Lady Dupont, perhaps with knowledge of a secret? Sir Reginald's jaw dropped, his voice hoarse. I did press her, yes. Charles, my brother, had dealings, shady ones, in his shipping business. I found papers after his death, hinted I'd expose them unless she helped me with my debts. But I swear, I didn't kill her. I was at the refreshment table, like I said. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And these papers, where are they now? Burned, Sir Reginald muttered. Eleanor paid to keep it quiet. I didn't need to kill her. She was already giving me what I wanted. Mercy, Poirot said, dismissing him. As Sir Reginald left, Poirot turned to Japp and Hastings. His blackmail is a motive, but his confession lacks the cunning of the murder. The dagger, the letter, they require a subtler mind. Hastings frowned. Then who? Marwood with his cigarette, or Marsh with the paint? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The cigarette places Marwood on the terrace, but the paint on the typewriter points to Marsh, and yet both may be distractions. The ledger, the key, the letter, they suggest a plan within a plan, a mind that manipulates others' weaknesses. He paused, his mind racing. The ledger's revelation of blackmail pointed to Sir Reginald, but the cigarette and paint suggested others had roles to play. Miss Crane's calm, her access to the study, lingered in his thoughts, as did Dr. Marwood's nervous obsession with Lady Dupont. The truth was close. Poirot sensed, hidden in the interplay of these clues, waiting for his logic to bring it into the light. The night was a maze, but Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct, was determined to find its heart. Chapter 9. A crack in the facade. The drawing room of Dupont Hall, with its damask curtains and flickering firelight, had become a stage for revelation, its air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled guests, his small, immaculate figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. The chandeliers above cast a soft glow, but the elegance of the setting was overshadowed by the grim reality of Lady Eleanor Dupont's murder. The guests, their earlier gaiety replaced by a tense silence, sat or stood in uneasy anticipation, their faces a gallery of fear, guilt, and curiosity. Captain Hastings, seated near the hearth, watched with bated breath, while Inspector Japp, notebook in hand, stood by the door, his eyes sharp for any sign of unrest. Messieurs, et Madame, Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. The murder of Lady Eleanor Dupont was no act of impulse. It was a performance, meticulously staged. The blackout, the dagger, the threatening literal props in a deadly play. But the facade of this crime is cracking, and the truth, it begins to emerge. The guests shifted, their gazes flickering between Poirot and one another. Clara Dupont, her blue silk gown creased from the night's ordeal, clutched her sapphire pendant, her eyes red but defiant. Victor Langston, her fiancé, stood rigidly beside her, his thin lips set in a line of controlled displeasure. Sir Reginald Dupont, his florid face haggard, gripped a chair for support, his earlier bluster subdued. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow, in her ostentatious burgundy gown, twisted her handkerchief, her sharp eyes darting nervously. Dr. Felix Marwood, his spectacles glinting, adjusted them repeatedly, his hands betraying his unease. Miss Lydia Crane, the secretary, stood apart, her grey gown blending into the shadows, her expression calm but watchful. Poirot held up the leather-bound ledger found in the study, its pages open to the cryptic entries of payments marked with the initials R.D. This ledger, he said, his tone measured, reveals a secret that Lady Dupont guarded a series of payments, substantial sums, to an individual who held power over her. Monsieur Sir Reginald Dupont, you have admitted to blackmail, using knowledge of your brother's illicit dealings to extract money from your sister-in-law. Is this not so? Sir Reginald's face flushed, his voice hoarse. I told you, Poirot, I pressed her for money, yes, but I didn't kill her. She was paying me. Why would I end that? The room stirred, whispers rippling among the guests. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Your motive, monsieur, is clear greed, but the precision of the murder, the dagger's strike, suggests a mind more calculated than yours. We shall return to you. He turned his gaze to Clara, his eyes softening but unyielding. Mademoiselle Clara, you were dancing with Monsieur Langston when the lights went out, yet your heart, it lies with Monsieur Julian Marsh. You have confessed to slipping out to the terrace during the dance to meet him, leaving Monsieur Langston alone. Is this not true? Clara's cheeks flushed, but she nodded, her voice steady. Yes, I went to the terrace to see Julian, just for a moment. I didn't know Aunt Eleanor would. I didn't see anything. Langston's eyes narrowed, his voice cold. She was gone only a second, Poirot. I was in the ballroom, confused like everyone else when the lights failed. Poirot's moustache twitched. And yet, Monsieur Langston, your alibi is weakened. Without Mademoiselle Clara at your side, you had opportunity. And Lady Dupont's disapproval of your engagement, did it not threaten your ambitions? Langston's jaw tightened. I respected her, despite her views. I had no reason to harm her. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Mrs. Harrow. Madame Harrow, your resentment of Lady Dupont's wealth was no secret. You spoke of her extravagance, her selfishness, to others tonight. Your alibi, a conversation with Lady Ashford, remains unconfirmed. Did your envy drive you to act? Mrs. Harrow's face twisted in indignation. How dare you? I despised her. Greed, yes, but I didn't kill her. I was with Lady Ashford, as I said. Poirot's eyes moved to Dr. Marwood, whose nervous tick adjusting his spectacles had grown more pronounced. Dr. Marwood, you were by the punch table, as Mademoiselle Crane confirms. Yet a cigarette stub, a Sabrini, was found on the terrace, where the door was ajar. You carry such a brand, n'est ce pas? Marwood's hands trembled, his voice faltering. I smoke Sabrunis, yes, but I wasn't on the terrace. I was in the ballroom, I swear. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And your feelings? For Lady Dupont, were they purely professional, or did they run deeper? Marwood's face paled, his words barely audible. She was my patient. I cared for her, nothing more. Finally, Poirot turned to Miss Crane, her calm demeanour a stark contrast to the other's agitation. Mademoiselle Crane, you managed Lady Dupont's affairs, had access to the study, the typewriter. You found the door ajar days ago, yet said nothing. Why? Miss Crane's eyes met his, unflinching. I thought it a servant's oversight. I had no reason to suspect foul play. Poirot paused, letting the silence weigh on the room. Mies. Amos, each of you carries a motive, greed, envy, ambition, love, or obsession. The letter, typed on the study's Remington, bore a smudge of red paint, pointing to Monsieur Marsh. The dagger, taken from a locked case, suggests intimate knowledge of the house. The cigarette on the terrace implicates Dr. Marwood. Yet, these clues, they form a pattern, a facade designed to distract. He held up the brass key with the Dupont crest. This key, found hidden in the study, unlocked the case holding the dagger. Someone took it, planned the murder, and returned it to mislead. The blackout, the letter, the dagger, they are not random, but orchestrated. The killer is among you, and the crack in their facade grows wider. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the tension palpable. Clara's hand tightened on her pendant. Langston's eyes flickered with calculation. Sir Reginald muttered under his breath. Mrs. Harrow's handkerchief twisted into knots. Marwood's spectacles slipped, and Miss Crane remained still, her gaze steady. Japp cleared his throat. Blimey, Poirot, you've got them all on edge. But who's it pointing to? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The truth, mon cher Japp, is not yet complete. But the ledger, the key, the paint, the cigarette, they are pieces of a mosaic. One more piece, and the picture will be clear. Hastings leaned closer, whispering, You're close, aren't you, Poirot? I can see it in your eyes. Poirot's lips curved slightly. Oui, mon ami. The facade cracks, and soon the killer's mask will fall. The drawing room, once a place of warmth and elegance, was now a crucible of suspicion, and Hercule Poirot, with his relentless logic, stood poised to expose the hidden truth that would bring justice to Dupont Hall. Chapter 10. The Final Piece. The Library of Dupont Hall. with its oak-panelled walls and the soft glow of the fire, had become Hercule Poirot's crucible, where the molten fragments of clues were being forged into a single, unyielding truth. The air was heavy with the residue of suspicion. The earlier elegance of the evening now a distant memory in the wake of Lady Eleanor Dupont's murder. Poirot stood before the mahogany table, his small, impeccable figure radiating a quiet intensity. His gloved hands clasped as he surveyed the evidence before him, the anonymous letter, the brass key with the Dupont crest, the ledger of cryptic payments, and the cigarette stub wrapped in his handkerchief. Captain Hastings, seated to his left, fidgeted with a pen, his face a mix of anticipation and bewilderment, while Inspector Japp, leaning against a bookshelf, flipped through his notebook, his expression one of impatient resolve. "Blimey, Poirot," Japp said, his voice rough with the strain of the night. "We've got motives, alibis, and clues enough to fill a book, but we're still circling. That dagger, the letter, the blackout, who's it all pointing to?" Poirot's moustache twitched, his dark eyes gleaming with the clarity of a man who saw the puzzle's final piece within reach. "Mon cher Japp, the truth is like a mosaic piece, however small, fits into the whole. The letter, the key, the paint, the cigarette, they are not disparate but interwoven, leading us to the heart of this crime. One final piece, and the picture will be complete." Hastings leaned forward, his voice eager. "You've got something, haven't you?" "Poirot, I can tell you're practically glowing with it." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Oui, mon ami. The little grey cells, they have been working, and now they whisper the truth. But we must test this truth, for certainty is the foundation of justice." Poirot's attention turned to the cigarette stub, a sobriquet found on the terrace. Its presence had implicated Dr. Felix Marwood, whose nervous tics and fixation on Lady Dupont had not escaped Poirot's notice. Yet the paint smudge on the typewriter, pointing to Julian Marsh, suggested a deliberate attempt to mislead. The ledger's entries, revealing Sir Reginald's blackmail, provided a motive, but his clumsy demeanor lacked the precision of the murder. The key, hidden in the study, hinted at someone with intimate access to the house's secrets, and Miss Lydia Crane's calm, her access to the study, lingered in Poirot's mind. But it was a new detail, uncovered in a quiet moment of reflection, that brought the pieces together. Poirot had requested a search of the guests' rooms, conducted discreetly by Japp's constables while the interviews proceeded. In Dr. Marwood's room, they had found a medical journal, its pages marked with notes on a rare poisony conatine, derived from the monkshood plant, known for its ability to weaken the heart without leaving a trace in a cursory examination. The discovery was a spark in Poirot's mind, igniting a theory that the dagger's strike, though fatal, was not the sole cause of Lady Dupont's death. "Tiens," Poirot murmured, holding up the journal, which a constable had delivered moments earlier. "This poison, aconitine, weakens the victim, makes them vulnerable to a single, precise blow." The dagger was dramatic, but the poison, it was the silent partner in this crime. Japp's eyes widened. "Poison? You're saying she was poisoned and stabbed?" "That's a bit theatrical, even for this slot precisement," Poirot replied. "The theatricality is the key. The blackout, the dagger, the letter, they were meant to dazzle, to distract from the subtler act. The poison required knowledge, access, and opportunity, qualities possessed by one among us." Poirot requested Dr. Marwood's presence, and the physician entered, his slight frame trembling, his spectacles slipping as he adjusted them repeatedly. His face was pale, his eyes darting between Poirot and the journal on the table, Dr. Marwood, Poirot began, his voice deceptively gentle. You were by the punch table, as Mademoiselle Crane confirms. Yet a cigarette stub, a sobranie, places you on the terrace near the open door. And this journal your notes on aconitine suggest a knowledge most incriminating. Marwood's hands shook, his voice barely audible. I study many compounds, Monsieur. It's my profession. I wasn't on the terrace, I swear it. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And your feelings for Lady Dupont? You cared for her, Nan. Perhaps too deeply, an obsession that turned to despair when she did not return your affection. Marwood's face crumpled, his voice breaking. I loved her, yes, she was everything, but I didn't kill her. I couldn't. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. Then explain the cigarette, Doctor. Explain the poison. Explain why your journal marks aconitine, a substance that would ensure a dagger's strike was fatal. Marwood's composure shattered. He sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. I wrote the letter, he confessed, his voice a whisper. I typed it, to scare her, to make her turn to me for protection. I used the typewriter in the study, wore gloves to avoid prints. But the paint eye didn't know about that. And the poison, I studied it, yes, but I never used it. I was on the terrace, smoking, before the dance began, but I was in the ballroom when the lights went out. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And the dagger, Doctor, you had access to the house, too. The key, you tampered with the lights, to frame Sir Reginald, whose blackmail you feared would expose your obsession. Marwood's head snapped up, his eyes wild. Yes, I tampered with the fuse box. I wanted to scare Reginald, make him think he'd be blamed. But I didn't stab her. I couldn't. She was already dead when I reached her. The room fell silent, the weight of Marwood's confession hanging heavy. Japp stepped forward, his voice firm. That's enough, Doctor. You're coming with us. As a constable led Marwood away, Poirot turned to Hastings and Japp, his expression solemn. The final piece, Mies Amos. Marwood's obsession drove him to the letter, to the blackout, to the attempt to frame Sir Reginald. The poison, I suspect, was administered earlier in her drink, ensuring the dagger strike was fatal. The paint on the typewriter was a misdirection, perhaps placed by another to implicate Julian Marsh. Hastings frowned. But who, then, could Crane have done it to protect Marwood's secret? Poirot shook his head. None, mon ami. Miss Crane is observant, but her role is not that of the killer. The true orchestrator is Marwood, whose love turned to madness. The evidence, the journal, the cigarette, his confession confirms it. Japp nodded, closing his notebook. That's it then, a messy business, but you've nailed it, Poirot. Poirot's eyes remained distant, his mind still turning. The mosaic is complete, but the heart of this crime love twisted into betrayal leaves a bitter taste. Let us ensure justice is done. The library, once a place of quiet reflection, was now the scene of truth's unveiling, and Hercule Poirot, with his unerring logic, had found the final piece that brought light to the shadows of Dupont Hall. Chapter 11. The Resolution, the drawing room of Dupont Hall. Its damask curtains, drawn against the encroaching night, was a sombre stage for the denouement of Lady Eleanor Dupont's murder. The chandeliers, though still aglow, cast a muted light over the assembled guests, their faces etched with a mix of shock, relief, and lingering unease. Hercule Poirot stood before them, his compact figure radiating an authority that silenced the murmurs and commanded every eye. His gloved hands were clasped, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, a testament to the order he sought to restore in the wake of chaos. Captain Hastings, seated near the hearth, watched with a mixture of awe and exhaustion, while Inspector Japp, flanked by 2 constables, stood ready to act on Poirot's revelations. "Messieurs, et Madame," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the heavy air like a bell. The murder of Lady Eleanor Dupont was a tragedy orchestrated with precision. A blackout, a dagger, a threatening letter, all designed to conceal the truth. But the truth, it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. The facade has cracked, and the killer stands revealed. The guests stirred, their gazes flickering between Poirot and Dr. Felix Marwood, who sat slumped in a chair, his spectacles askew, his face pale and drawn. Clara Dupont, her blue silk gown now wilted, clutched her sapphire pendant, her eyes red, but resolute. Victor Langston stood beside her, his cold demeanor softened by a flicker of unease. Sir Reginald Dupont, his florid face haggard, gripped a glass of water, his earlier bluster replaced by a grim silence. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow, her burgundy gown stark against the pale upholstery, twisted her handkerchief, her sharp eyes wide with anticipation. Miss Lydia Crane, ever composed, stood at the edge of the group, her grey gown blending into the shadows, her notebook clutched tightly. Poirot held up the leather-bound ledger, its cryptic entries a silent witness to the motives that had festered within Dupont Hall. "This ledger," he said, "revealed Sir Reginald's blackmail, a scheme to extract money from Lady Dupont using secrets of her late husband's dealings. A motive, but too clumsy for the murder's precision." Sir Reginald's head jerked up, his voice hoarse. "I told you, Poirot, I didn't kill her. I needed her alive." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Clara and Langston. "Mademoiselle Clara, your love for Monsieur Julian Marsh clashed with your engagement to Monsieur Langston, whose ambition Lady Dupont opposed. You slipped to the terrace during the dance, leaving Monsieur Langston without an alibi for those crucial seconds. Yet your grief, mademoiselle, is genuine, and Monsieur Langston, though cold, lacks the passion for such a theatrical crime." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Langston's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Poirot turned to Mrs. Harrow. "Madame Harrow, your envy of Lady Dupont's wealth was no secret. Your alibi, a conversation with Lady Ashford, remains unconfirmed. But your bitterness, it is loud, not subtle, and this murder required subtlety." Mrs. Harrow's lips pursed, her voice sharp. "I despised her greed, but I'm no murderer." Poirot's eyes moved to Miss Crane, her calm a stark contrast to the other's agitation. "Mademoiselle Crane, your access to the study, your knowledge of the house, made you a figure of interest. Yet your role, I believe, was to observe, not to act." Miss Crane's gaze met his, unflinching. "I served Lady Dupont faithfully, Monsieur Poirot." Finally, Poirot's gaze settled on Dr. Marwood, whose trembling hands betrayed his unraveling composure. "Dr. Marwood," Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding, "you confessed to writing the letter, typed on the study's Remington, to frighten Lady Dupont into seeking your protection. You tampered with the fuse box, creating the blackout to frame Sir Reginald, whose blackmail you feared would expose your obsession. But there is more, n'est-ce pas?" Marwood's face crumpled, his voice a broken whisper. "I loved her. I only wanted her to need me." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Your love turned to madness, Doctor. In your room, we found a medical journal. Its pages marked with notes on a conatina poison that weakens the heart, ensuring a dagger strike would be fatal. You administered it, perhaps in her champagne, before the dance. The dagger, taken with the key you stole from the study, was your final act, delivered in the blackout you orchestrated. The cigarette stub on the terrace, a sobranie placed you there, planning your move. The paint smudge on the typewriter, a misdirection to implicate Monsieur Marsh, was your attempt to muddy the waters. Marwood's head bowed, his voice barely audible. I couldn't bear her indifference. She was everything, and I was nothing to her. I thought, if I could save her, she'd see me. But when she refused, I lost control. The room erupted in gasps, Clara's sob cutting through the murmurs. Japp stepped forward, his voice firm. Dr. Felix Marwood, you're under arrest for the murder of Lady Eleanor Dupont. As the constables led Marwood away, his shoulders slumped. The guests stood in stunned silence. Sir Reginald muttered a curse. Mrs. Harrow's handkerchief fell to the floor, and Langston's cold facade cracked, his hand reaching for Clara's. Miss Crane, ever composed, closed her notebook, her eyes betraying a flicker of sorrow. Poirot addressed the room, his voice steady. The dance of Lady Dupont was her last, but it revealed the truth. Obsession, disguised as love, led to betrayal. The letter, the poison, the dagger, they were the steps of a tragic performance, now ended. Justice, Mies, Amos, is restored. Hastings, his voice low, leaned toward Poirot. You did it again, old chap. Pulled the threads together like magic. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but his expression was somber. Nan, mon ami. Not magic, but method. The human heart. It dances to its own rhythm, sometimes to destruction, but order, it prevails. The drawing room, once a place of elegance, was now a witness to justice, and Hercule Poirot, with his relentless logic, had brought the curtain down on the killer's deadly masquerade. Chapter 12. The departure. The dawn broke over Dupont Hall with a tentative light, its golden rays filtering through the mist that clung to the Kentish hills. The grand estate, once aglow with the promise of revelry, now stood subdued, its honey-coloured stone muted under a sky heavy with clouds. The events of the night Lady Eleanor Dupont's murder, the unmasking of Dr. Felix Marwood as her killer had cast a pall over the house, stripping away its veneer of elegance to reveal the raw undercurrents of human frailty. Hercule Poirot, his Homburg hat adjusted with precision, stood on the gravel drive, his small, impeccable figure a stark contrast to the sprawling grandeur behind him. Beside him, Captain Hastings, his suitcase in hand, gazed at the hall with a mixture of melancholy and relief, his usual cheer tempered by the weight of the tragedy. Dash it, Poirot, Hastings said, his voice low as the Rolls-Royce that would carry them to the station crunched to a halt nearby. What a grim affair. All that splendor, those chandeliers and gowns, ruined by one man's obsession. It's enough to make you lose faith in human nature. Poirot's mustache twitched, his dark eyes gleaming with a quiet resolve. Mon ami, elegance is but a mask, and the human heart, it dances to its own rhythm, sometimes to destruction. Yet, in the end, order is restored, and that is enough for Hercule Poirot. The guests, now freed from the confines of the ballroom, had begun to disperse, their departures marked by hushed conversations and hurried farewells. Clara Dupont, her auburn curls framing a face still pale with grief, stood on the steps, her sapphire pendant glinting in the morning light. She had broken her engagement to Victor Langston, whose cold ambition had crumbled in the face of her resolve to follow her heart. Julian Marsh, the artist, stood beside her, his velvet jacket a quiet defiance of the formal world he had never fully belonged to. Their hands brushed briefly, a silent promise of a future unburdened by the shadows of Dupont Hall. Sir Reginald Dupont, his florid face etched with shame, had vowed to reform, his blackmail scheme exposed as a desperate bid to salvage his debts. He lingered in the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing as he prepared to face a future without Lady Dupont's wealth to prop him up. Mrs. Beatrice Harrow, her burgundy gown packed away, had retreated into a sullen silence, her envy of her cousins' fortune now a bitter memory. She boarded a car for London, her sharp eyes avoiding the gazes of those around her. Miss Lydia Crane, ever the composed secretary, had taken charge of the estate's affairs with a quiet efficiency that belied her youth. Her grey gown was unchanged, but her notebook was now filled with plans to settle Lady Dupont's legacy, her loyalty to her late employer unwavering. Poirot, observing her from the drive, noted the faint sorrow in her eyes, a glimpse of humanity. Beneath her reserved exterior, Inspector Japp emerged from the hall, his weathered face creased with a weary satisfaction. "Well, Poirot," he said, tipping his hat, "you've done it again. Marwood's in custody, and the evidencia poison theory, the cigarette, that journal—it's airtight. The coroner's checking for aconitine now, but I'd bet my badge you're right." Poirot inclined his head, his expression modest but firm. "Merci, mon cher Japp. The truth, it reveals itself when we attend to the details. The letter, the dagger, the blackout, they were Marwood's stage, but his obsession betrayed him." Japp chuckled, a rare sound in the morning's gloom. "You and your little grey cells never fails. I'll wrap things up here, paperwork. You know, safe travels back to London." As Japp returned to the hall, Poirot and Hastings climbed into the Rolls-Royce, the chauffeur closing the door with a soft thud. The car glided down the drive, the gardens and fountain fading into the mist as they left Dupont Hall behind. Inside, Poirot sat with his cane across his knees, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside, his mind still turning over the case's intricacies. Hastings, settling into the plush seat, sighed. "I suppose Clara and Julian will be all right, won't they? She's got spirit, that girl. And Marsh seems a decent sort for an artist." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Oui, mon ami. Love, when it is true, finds its way. Mademoiselle Clara has chosen her path, and Monsieur Marsh, he will paint it with her. As for the others, they must face their own truths, Sir Reginald his debts, Madame Harrow her envy, Mademoiselle Crane her duty." The train station appeared, its platform bustling with early travellers, and the Rolls-Royce drew to a halt. Poirot and Hastings disembarked, their luggage handled by the chauffeur with practiced ease. As they boarded the train for London, the whistle sounded, a sharp note that cut through the morning's quiet. The carriage was warm, its windows framing the receding silhouette of Dupont Hall. Now little more than a shadow in the mist. Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression serene. "The dance of Dupont Hall is over, mon ami. The music has stopped, but the melody of truth, it lingers." Hastings nodded, his gaze distant. "You always see it through, Poirot. Makes me wonder what we'll stumble into next." Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he said nothing, his mind already turning to the order of his London flat, where a cup of tisane and the symmetry of his life awaited. The train gathered speed, carrying them away from the secrets of Dupont Hall. its shadows, dispelled by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. The end.